Hello and welcome to Honest Christian Girl. I'm Chloe Mack and I am honored that you came back for more. Before we dive in, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. We are going to get into it. You have all these goals to be a woman of God. They burn in your mind and you get all excited. You set out on your new mission, but for some reason, these goals aren't attainable. Or maybe you do them for a season and you fall off the wagon. You can't figure out why. I want to tell you that one of the greatest enemies to a woman of God is passivity. Let me tell you about a woman with absolutely no passivity. It's Gladys Aylward, that missionary to China early 19th century. She's been going to these weekly prayer meetings where they've been praying for the northern parts of China. A couple weeks in, she asked the question, is anyone actually going to these places we've been praying for? No, we can't go. We're studying. We're too busy. Not Gladys. She goes, no problem. I'll go tomorrow. She packs up her bags and sets out, begins trekking. Days turn into weeks and she's seeing salvations all along the way, and she makes it to very desolate northern China. She's out there, the sun is setting, and she has nowhere to spend the night. She drops to her knees and she begins praying for provision. And as she looks up, she sees a man in the distance. She makes her way over to him, and he is a Tibetan Lama priest. He meets Gladys ecstatic. He invites her to come to the monastery, which was weird because women weren't allowed in those sacred places. And he says this line, "We have been waiting for you to tell us about the God who loves." Now, this is an evangelist's dream. She's perplexed, but she goes to the monastery where 500 men gather to hear her preach the gospel days on end. They're so hungry for God. They're banging on her door at night. Keep preaching. Lead us into worship. She's perplexed. She needs answers. What is going on? What I'm about to tell you marked my life. She meets the head monk who told her 8 years prior an evangelist met one of them and gave him a gospel tract with John 3:16. Obviously, they read about this God who loved, who sent his only son, and they were curious, who is this God? So every day for 5 years, they waited outside where they had met the evangelist, hoping to see him again to ask him more questions. 5 years in, they haven't seen him, and they find a Bible, and in it they read the Great Commission. Go into all the world preaching, and they stopped there. They said, the people that believe in the God who love preach. And so someone will come preach to us who this God is. And they waited 3 more years where they finally ran into Gladys Aylward. Gladys answered 8 years of waiting, and the fruit of it was 500 men giving their life to Jesus. All this happened in a prayer meeting with no prophetic confirmation, no wisdom from anyone else. She saw a need and said, I can do that, and I'll do it tomorrow. Every unbelievable testimony Gladys had was on the other side of initiation. I personally saw the power of initiation in my own life 5 years ago. At the time, I got newly diagnosed with Lyme's disease. It was miserable. Brain fog, fatigue, and I was really believing for healing, but never imagined it would come like this. I'm at this event and we're leading worship, and I was having a particularly hard health day. Before we went out, I asked the band to please pray for me. I needed a touch from God. I'm side stage with my dad, who turned to me and said, this guy preaching needs to pray for your healing. In agreement, I'm like, absolutely, afterwards. My dad goes, no, right now. I look out on the stage. This man is wrapping up his sermon. He's on his knees. The tender music is going, and there are thousands and thousands of people in the crowd. So I go, Dad, he can pray for me after the service. My dad looks at me and goes, I believe God wants to heal you right now. You need to walk out on that stage. Again, I said no. And he said, I'm not going to stand before God on that day and tell him I had fear of man. That's on you. At this point, I'm thinking about Judgment Day. My dad's staring at me with dad eyes. So I had no choice. I walk out on the stage. I get on my knees next to this preacher man. He turns to me. I'm expecting a rebuke. And he says, I know your kids aren't going to be sick like you. And he begins to pray for my healing. And I woke up the next morning, 6 a.m., full of energy, ready to work out, which was something that was impossible to me. And I sit here today with actual test proof that I've been healed from Lyme's disease. Can you imagine if my fear of man or my passivity had won in that moment? I honestly can't tell you what my life would be like, but I can tell you that every single day I feel the effects of pushing through my passivity. Passivity is a thief, and it likes to mask itself with all these excuses. But at the end of the day, its goal is to steal from us. And as women, we must understand this sneaky character and take it down with violence. Passivity is simply the opposite of initiation. It's slowness to change. It's a resistance to transformation. It's like a turtle or a sloth. James 4:17 outdoes itself and describes it this way. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. Passivity is when we know what we should do, but for some reason we just don't do it. For the remainder of this podcast, I am going to go into the 4 ways I have seen passivity rear its ugly little head in my life and in our generation. And as we understand these things, we are going to violently take them down and grasp our identity as women of initiation. Are you ready? This is going to be rated R. I'm scared. Number 1, passivity hinders our growth in God. It's when we know what we should do. Our Bible is dusty, our prayer life is dead, and we know we need to get to it, but we don't do it. And we actually obsessively think about it. We lay in bed, I need to pray, I need to read my Bible, and then we scroll on TikTok. It makes no sense. When this happens in my life, I have this statement. I go, I'll start tomorrow, I'll do it next week, and I'm waiting for this feeling of motivation to take over my body. I'm waiting for the perfect reading plan to land in my lap, and what ends up happening is weeks go by. And then I finally open up my Bible and I feel stopped up inside. It's like I haven't gone to the gym in months and months, and I dive in and I feel out of shape. I feel out of breath. I become discouraged, and now I don't want to do it at all. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me is simply I've been passive, and I have work to do to get back in the flow with God. Number 2, passivity hates to make the first move. And I will gladly use myself as an example. I have often complained about having few close friends. You may know what I'm talking about. I have 100 billion acquaintances, and my husband will hear me complain about this, say, why don't you just get coffee with one of those women and get to know them more? No. It's not that simple, Derek. I have a rejection complex, and if I hang out with them, they're gonna hate me. They don't want to hang out with me anyways. They might say no. And underneath that rejection is something far more devious. The truth is, I don't want to invest in relationships. The truth is, I don't want to take the time to really invest into somebody if I don't know exactly where it's going to go. Or it's worse. How could it get worse at this point? It's me at a social gathering, and I hang back because I don't want to invest in someone. And if it's meant to be, they will approach me. And I wait in the corner, sweaty, anxious, unable to initiate. I leave depressed. Everybody hates me. And the truth is, God's like, I had so many divine appointments for you with other people. And if you just would have stepped out of your fear, you would have had a great time. I've truly just exposed myself. So we should move on to number 3. Number 3 is passivity leads to isolation. You can see if there's this pattern, it will lead to isolation. And in isolation, I have the thoughts, I don't really need anybody. I've got this. I've got this for my God dreams, and I've also got this when life is tough. But if you've ever experienced isolation, you know that it is a breeding ground for temptation. In isolation, the enemy always hits us hard. Comparison, lust, some old addiction, habitual sin, it starts rearing its ugly head, but you've been isolated. Who can you text? Who can you call to bail you out of your scenario? See, passivity will be in a room of heroes, but not ask a question. Passivity will be in a church with a great pastor, but never go to the front to shake his hand. Passivity will have an okay youth pastor, but they're not really meeting your standards. So do you really need to invest in relationship with them? But when the warfare hits, God put them in your life so they could bail you out. We need people. Okay, now let me move on and tell you how I truly get free from passivity. When I admit that passivity is a form of rebellion. Because passivity knows what it should do, but doesn't do it? It is disobedience to God. But we often don't see it that way because our delay in obedience is shrouded with insecurity. It's shrouded with unbelief or doubt. But when we look at the story that I shared about Gladys Elward, there was an incredible cost to walking out the things God asked her to do. Passivity is comfortable, and obedience is often very, very uncomfortable. Right now, your journal is probably filled with these God-sized dreams that you might think are 10, 20 years away. What if they were for now? What if the time on the earth was so urgent that God wanted you to walk out these things without all the proper steps you think you need to take? But this resistance and rebellion will keep us from receiving the grace we need from God to move forward. The enemy's biggest goal is to sideline you. He's not so much after making you an atheist as he is making you a lazy, passive Christian. It is time to run the race set before you, and it comes down to the very practicals. Honesty with Jesus. What are those things that he's asked you to do a long time ago and you're not doing? What are those simple life habits you've been putting off or waiting for the perfect feeling to do? Are there people in your life you're supposed to be running with, but you won't even text back? Today is the day of breakthrough, and you don't need a magical encounter. You've got to just get up and do it. I close with this. You are most in joy when you are living out who you were made to be. And I promise you, scripture shows, and we will unveil in more episodes, that you were designed to be a woman of action, a woman of initiation, an agent of change. I can't wait to read the DMs of all the action that you've taken this week. And I will see you on our next episode. Bye.